This is the HX Collective Work Channel, where we explore how our relationship with work shapes our growth and flourishing. Join me and my guests from the Wellock Group, Rick Wellock and Amy Staggs, as they recount their connection with workplace situations and the impact of these situations on their human experience. The HX Collective explores the human experience through three main channels of life: work, relationships, and self. With raw, authentic conversations, the podcast investigates how challenges can become powerful teachers, leading to personal growth and deeper connections. Rooted in humanity-centered design, each episode reflects a commitment to doing good and doing well, featuring diverse voices and generational perspectives. Expect gripping stories of struggle and success, with thought-provoking discussions and concrete tools and tactics that encourage you to rethink your relationship with distress, helping you to establish your full human experience. This is the HX Collective Channel.
Hello, my good friends from the Wellock Group. I am so excited to have this conversation today with you, Amy and Rick, as we are all united in our work with the HX Collective and as allies of this movement and of this media platform. I'm so excited for our audience to meet you today. So before we get started into our conversation, I would love for each of you to take a moment to introduce yourselves and introduce the work of the Wellock Group, and then we'll dive right in. So, Amy, why don't I have you start?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having us. We're so pleased to be here. It's a privilege. My name is Amy Wellock Staggs, and I am an executive coach and life coach. And in a former life, I worked in arts management and recognized, yes, I worked in film, in the music industry, and then in the fine arts industry. And I was very drawn to creative people. And I recognized over a period of time, it's because, as I noticed, they tended to be the most willing to discuss all of experience, their experience, how they view the world, very honestly and earnestly and critically, and with a proprietary hope that I found wasn't just in the lane of artists, but all humans have that. So I became very interested in pursuing coaching work, which is actually a family business. So I am Rick's daughter, have been for 43 years, and we are now in business together with Wellock Group. So we do executive coaching, developmental work, performance work, and we do it in a very holistic way, working with the whole of each person. And I'm a mom to a 4-year-old boy and a 7-year-old girl, and I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
I love it. Well, it's so much important context. And I love that creative piece in your background. And it is so intertwined with the experience of being fully human. Rick,
Yes.
I'll have you do the same. Please give us a little introduction and context.
Thank you, Deb. I appreciate and value the privilege of being with you, having been with you now in a different capacity for many years. Well, I have been in the human dynamic development and business business for 43 years. And I am actively involved. I'm 78. I have my daughter, Amy, who just introduced herself. I have a son, Reed, and my wife is Dodie, Dody. We've been married 51 years. So that gives you a sense of roots, and how I flourished is when I have let go of seeking to be a professional in a role, use expertise to guide people to closure, outcome, and impact. Well, I have a varied background and training, but why I want to say this is I'm just Rick Wellock now. Who and what you see is who and what you get. And it's a joy to help people become that, to humanize professionalism. And our work is around enriching, strengthening, and being very strategic and tactical advocates for and with our clients.
I love that. Well, you gave a little bit of a precursor and friends and for our audience to listen. I have to say, not only was it a pleasure to have Amy and Rick here, but I can say that I am their client. And so, as a professional in my own world, a big part of my human experience and elevating my human flourishing is to recognize the importance of investment in self. So, this is going to be a more interesting conversation because not only do I have the opportunity to learn and hear from them, but I can give you my first world experience of how impactful both of you have been in my living out to my highest and best potential. So I'm excited to have the context of your backgrounds and for our audience to know you. So I'm going to begin with really an important foundational question. And as we know, the work of the Human Experience Collective, the HX way of looking at things, is we're united in our mission to elevate the human experience, to elevate human flourishing. And some might say contextually, we're recording this in March of 2025. And if we're paying attention to context, we know that this is a moment in time where the human experience is really at stake. And so, Amy, as you think about why this is such a critical moment for us to think strategically, to think specifically and tactically around what is required, why is this the right time to have this conversation from your vantage point?
I think that now and always, humans are well served to remember that we are not islands. We operate, while we may need to pull back and have individual perspective, we we function more fully and we flourish when we are together and when we are a part of intentionally in ecosystems in our different pockets of life. And I think now, especially, being reminded that we're not victims. We are always at a point of choice. So being with ourselves, others, and being reminded that we are always at a point of choice and always have opportunities to learn. I think it's especially poignant.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think it's so important to really pull out the through line. First of all, that sense of ecosystem. I would say it's this idea that humans work best in ecosystems and community. And I love that you're already introducing the priority importance of choice. That we aren't victims. And when Rick, when you think similarly around this timing, this particular notion of the human experience, why do you think this is such a critical discussion for us to be engaging?
It's the nature of the way things are, how they've evolved, how people at different ages and stages of their lives and of their business are consistently caught in tension. That there's a number of what I call perturbation points, tipping points, be it corporately, uh, personally, interpersonally, and globally. So I'm big on time and place. Is this the right time and is this the right place? If so, who should I be with and how should I be with them? So there's a number of concurrent uh, tensions that Amy and I are able to engage, having embraced tension and struggle in our own life. So I would say it's timely. It's the fullness of the time. It's the readiness. And for these kinds of engagements and relationships, locally and globally, I, I'm also just to acknowledge everything we do is about relationships. Everything we do is about results, regardless of the culture. A relationship, an inseparable loop, give and take between results and relationship, and and those results can vary considerably in terms of outcome and impact. But relationships are really the glue that hold everything together.
So, Rick, there's so much wisdom when you give perspective on anything. And I want our audience to get the full benefit of a Rick Wellockinism that just was introduced. On my best days, I know one of the things you've inspired in me is to hold the space to say, who am I supposed to be with today and how am I supposed to be with them? And when you can begin that from that relationship perspective, it just opens the world in every dynamic where you're interacting with another human being, whether that's in a live setting or your eyeball to eyeball through a video mechanism like we are today. And there's so much impact and power around that. I also think the kind of recommending or redefining or reimagining struggle. I suspect that for most of us, when we think about human flourishing, we see that as an interchangeable with human happiness. And what I've learned, and I think what will unfold in our discussion today, is that it's critical when we think about our human experiences not to have this false narrative that it's just happy clappy, it's all Pollyanna positive. It's actually that really engaging the point, the purpose of the struggle or the challenge in a way that can really shape us into being who we should fully be. So let's talk, if we can. One of the first lenses of the HX Collective and really thinking about the subject of human experience is through the lens of work. And, so much I know the work of the Wellock Group really is to come alongside actual business executives and leaders in the context of companies and organizations. And so, Amy, when you think about the context of to elevate a human experience in the workplace, what are some things at a high level that would signal to you and to our audience how we should be thinking about this subject and how we should be embracing or engaging this, not necessarily as a nice to do or as a soft skill, but actually as an essential skill? How might you respond to the priority of HX in the workplace?
I think first defining it. So first always checking assumptions, right? Recognizing that we all uniquely find meaning. So looking at the way that we see human flourishing, you're right. To your point earlier, it's not just about a destination where you can have sustained happiness. We acknowledge that it is actually a part of a seasonal process. If it helps to look at it this way, it's like the four seasons where we go through periods and experiences corporately and individually of spring, summer, fall, and winter. So that's one way to help contextualize. So recognizing, okay, this is part of a process that does have to do with positive forward motion, right? So continuing to choose to live, continuing to choose to flourish. We're going to continue to choose to head towards increasing profits and, hopefully not sacrificing values and staying with our mission. So what's a good way to do that, continuing forward and taking everyone with us? Recognizing, again, we're always at a point of choice and we also have perspective. So when I think about human flourishing and work, I think about introducing and returning to perspective. So being on the shop floor with your people or with your executive team, and then recognizing there's always a series of balconies that you can go to consider, okay, what is actually happening with them? What is actually happening with me? What is actually happening with stakeholders? And how does this fit into flourishing, into thriving? Everything going well at the very least, right? So that almost always provides aha moments, right? They might be mountaintop moments to some. You can't live on the mountain. You're going to end up returning into the valley, and that's okay. It's part of the seasonal piece of life, and that's part of the seasons of being in business too.
So true. I think what I'm pulling from that too, and the seasonal perspective is a good one because I think it helps us align around expectations. If we take it to its kind of a next level of expectation, it's like when you're in a winter season and it's cold, it shouldn't be surprising to us that it's cold and that we need to add extra layers in order to be effective and to function well in that particular set of environment. It's quite another thing to be in the middle of a winter season and say, well, it shouldn't be cold. I mean, I recognize it's winter, but it needs to be different. And again,
Am I resisting this cold that is actually just part of this process?
exactly. Exactly. And I think if we can have that more affirmative expectation of the seasonality, I also like the idea of a part of human flourishing, particularly as a leader, is to have stakeholder perspective. A lot of people will say, are you taking into account another person's point of view? And it's one thing to be at the thinking stage, it's another to really put yourself in the shoes and the vantage points of the various cultures with which you're entrusted. I'm curious, Amy, if you can say a bit more when you were talking about being able to understand both Susan's and seeing from other people's perspective, how a leader can prioritize on a real practical level how to think about human flourishing while there's that forward motion towards profits. Anything else you might add in that front? And Rick, I'll be curious to hear what you have to say as well.
The importance of context is what comes to mind. Teaching and working with leaders to remember context and to remember the choice of curiosity too, right? So the mandate, the role of, growing the company, of, questioning what are the individual's rocks if they're looking at working with an individual on their team, that is one piece that is always in front of them, right? And then also so it's an and, right? What is happening in that person's life, perhaps, that would contextually give me a greater understanding that, one might direct the other as far as performance and as far as how they're contributing to the culture or how we as a culture might be able to better support them. So there's a mutuality piece.
I love it. So context and mutuality, great jumping off spot. Rick, we have spent a fair amount of time as we've been thinking about the human experience and my experience as an executive and owning a business and really leading a team of people. As you think about this subject and how to really make it more practical for leaders to understand what are some of the observations and some of the areas in which you're coaching can really start to give people maybe a new context or a new perspective, as Amy's highlighting.
Well, content is important, but it's very incomplete. You have to have context. Everything happens in context. So we use the metaphor or the analogy of the cat and the butterfly. Here, there's evolution there, but also metamorphosis. And that which is in the caterpillar carries what are called imaginal cells of the butterfly. And the job of the caterpillar is to eat and grow. But the purpose of the butterfly is to populate and step into a new role where it can do that. Two different purposes designed in. And we're the chrysalis business. We get right in the middle there where everything changes. And interestingly enough, the caterpillar is really the nurturant for what the butterfly needs and to emerge as it emerges. And there's struggle in that. There is no flourishing without struggle. You and I have come up with a way of describing that called homework. And essentially everything begins inside with the body, the brain, the mind, and the will, and the head, heart, and hands. So you're dealing with the whole person in their context in a way that creates conditions for them to learn and go, grow and mature and change and become more of who they actually are in the way they influence, in the way they act, and particularly in their relationships with others and what they're seeking to accomplish.
I love the caterpillar and butterfly analogy because, when I think about the role of the leader in all kind of three dimensions, whether you are at that stage of consumption and learning and growing, there's a role of human flourishing in your own leadership development. Then there's that chrysalis moment. And I think you said to me at one point, Rick, that, that the caterpillar literally has to liquefy in order to reshape and reform into what it's intended to become. And it's in that space that, you can't get to a breakthrough without that breakdown of what made you a being before to create the capacity for what you can be. And then that reemergence of that flourishing in the populating and producing and reproducing, in the butterfly state. So I think there's a lot of leader metaphors, but I also think about the leader in the role of making butterflies or helping caterpillars transition to butterflies. I'm curious as you think about, leaders that do this well or people who are successful. Rick, I'll come to you on this one. What is it that leaders are doing to create capacity for this kind of human experience so that people can actually do their homework and become who their best version of themselves could possibly be? What's your sense about that?
Well, my sense experience is it happens all by itself. Inside the apple is the oak tree. And there's a maturation process and a growth process that we all go through. Same with organizations. And the conditions that have to be in place is you can't reproduce what you don't possess. So it's all about learning how to eat your own dog food. And, and, and so the most important thing for a leader, for leadership, is followership. They have to be able to follow. And that not only talk, but listen, not only teach, but learn. So in our work, we develop these kinds of reciprocal relationships where people pair, and out from that, they create networks. And so they really serve one another in dialogue and in their collaboration. I like your direction here, really, if you'd like some concrete examples or whatever would be most grounding for people.
Well, I think I'm going to toss this one to Amy because I do think there is an abstract to what you're saying, but I also think there is a concreteness that the workplace is the container for which this kind of reciprocity can be ignited. It's this ability for leaders to experience or to be promoters of human flourishing when they have a capacity to receive it individually and then to be able to give it to others. And that sometimes is in the headship of leading, but it's also in a capacity for learning and followership. And so, as you think about the context of the workplace, I'll say, Rick, is there anything else to add? And then Amy, as you're thinking about, some practical things that leaders could be doing if they want to have more of the human experience alive and prioritized in the workplace. But Rick, anything else you might add to the context or the big picture that you've already established?
Well, we are working, and we each have distinct roles we play together with three different leaders. They're three different kinds. And essentially, they have to be open, not closed. They have to be willing and they have to be able, but we meet wherever they are. So it's giving them tools, develop skills internally and externally. I don't think there cannot not be leadership. Someone that initiates anything to anyone is leading, they're influencing. So at the micro level, it happens all the time. At the corporate level, there's a different kind of command and responsibility. So what I look at is a few things. One, it's a mindset. You have to take radical personal responsibility for yourself. You have to make, keep, and align your commitments with yourself and others. And you have to develop an adaptive mindset that nothing is tractable. A lot of what happens there is, I'll just leave it at that. There's a lot that happens inside, outside, between people in the context and the environment they're in.
Yeah. No, it's so true. Amy, when you think about some practical guidance, if I'm listening right now and I'm thinking about human flourishing through the lens of work, are there some practical ideas or even tools or tactics that you could point people to consider if they wanted to really prioritize this as a leader and engage in the skills and that adaptive mindset that Rick is speaking to?
I echo so much of what Rick said. You cannot reproduce what you don't possess. So, first and foremost, learning to check in with oneself in an honest and raw way is essential. Having a coach helps with that process, at least getting it started, and having determining firm ground and a foundation for that. So, deciding where you're going to operate from as a leader is essential, period. Right? Having leading inclinations and behaviors is not enough. So, a central operating system. And then the people that you're working with, determining what is my intention. Yes. And I find that touch points beyond a person doing their essential work, beyond the check boxes, is really important to building out actual flourishing. That is what builds out healthy and attractive culture. So, in addition, an example might be in addition to doing, one-on-ones that are operation focused, or again, rock focused, where are you on this? Going to a how are you? So there's a building of a trust that takes time, that must be more than transactional. It is a giving of oneself from the leader, giving time and giving space for the people that you're working with and that are working for you and under you to trust you. And again, that gives the leader more context of who's working with them and how they're actually doing.
I love it. So many nuggets of takeaway, but I can say the confidence that people can have in listening if you're thinking about the idea of how do I, as a leader in my workplace, in the context, Rick, I love that you said that, to the extent that we're all leaders, whether that's authoritative, positional, title based leadership, or that we are tasked with leading an activity, a function, a deliverable. There's an element of the work that we do from the inside out, and we create great capacities, I think, to see ourselves work through the seasons and as you're describing, and recognizing the metamorphosis that is essential to go from one state to a new optimal state, and how that process works. I also think that a through line in both of your insights is really around context. And that's, again, it's not enough just to have the content or the raw basic skills of operational leadership, but rather the human skills of not just what, but the how.
That's exactly.
Thanks for being here. If today's conversation sparked something in you, we hope you'll carry it forward with curiosity, compassion, and courage. Subscribe to the show, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs it. Until next time, keep exploring what it means to be fully human.